150 Cheyenne braves did not ride up to Amos Teller's doorstep by mistake. They came for answers, maybe vengeance, maybe something else entirely. Amos, a loner rancher in the middle of Wyoming's endless plains, was about to find out why. But to understand how it all went down, we need to go back to the start. About a day earlier, when the world still made sense to him. Amos was 42, his face carved by years of wrestling cattle and surviving Wyoming's brutal winters. His ranch sat in a shallow valley near the North Platte River, a lone outpost in a sea of sagebrush and sky. That morning, he was out fixing a busted gate on the northern edge of his property, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the early hour. The sun was climbing, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. He noticed a small shape moving in the distance, stumbling through the scrub like it was drunk or hurt. Most ranchers out here would have grabbed their shotgun first, especially with rumors of Cheyenne unrest after a bad treaty deal gone sour. Raids had spiked, and trust was thin. But Amos was not most ranchers. He had seen enough of life's rough edges to know trouble did not always mean danger. He dropped his hammer, letting it thud into the dirt, and walked toward the shape, squinting against the glare. As he got closer, he saw it was a boy, no more than 10, dressed in tattered Cheyenne clothing, beaded moccasins worn to threads, a deer-hide shirt caked with dirt and dried blood. The kid's face was hollow, his black hair matted with dust and sweat. He clutched his side, blood oozing between his fingers, staining the ground in small, dark drops. Amos froze, his breath catching. A wounded Cheyenne kid on his land was not just a problem, it was a spark in a dry field. But the boy's eyes, wide and glassy with pain, met his, and something in Amos's chest twisted hard. He could not turn away. Not from that look. He approached slow, hands out, palms up, like he was coaxing a spooked colt. The boy flinched, stumbling back a step, but he was too weak to run. Up close, Amos saw the wound, a deep, jagged gash across the kid's ribs, likely from an animal. The boy muttered something in Cheyenne, his voice faint and raspy, too jumbled to make sense. Amos did not speak the language, but he knew desperation when he saw it. He knelt, keeping his movement steady, and pointed to the wound, then to himself, trying to signal help. The boy's eyes flickered with fear, but he nodded, swaying on his feet. Amos scooped him up, the kid's body light as a sack of grain, and carried him back to the ranch house, his boots kicking up dust with every step. Inside, Amos laid the boy on a cot by the stove, its faint warmth cutting through the morning chill. He grabbed a clean cloth, a basin of water, and a bottle of whiskey he kept for emergencies. The wound was ugly claw marks, probably a wolf, deep enough to hurt but not to kill if cleaned fast. Amos soaked the cloth in water, dabbing at the blood, his hands steady despite the boy's sharp gasps. He stitched the gash with fishing line, each pull of the needle making the kid's jaw clench, his small fists balled tight. Amos worked fast, muttering apologies the boy could not understand. When it was done, he offered water and a chunk of cornbread from last night's supper. The kid ate like he had not seen food in days, crumbs falling as his hands shook. Amos sat back in his creaky chair, watching, trying to piece together who this boy was and how he ended up alone, bleeding on his land. As the boy ate, Amos's eyes caught on a small pouch around the kid's neck, tied with rawhide and decorated with quills and beads in an intricate pattern. His stomach sank. He had seen that design before, on a Cheyenne trader who passed through last spring. It belonged to the family of Black Elk, a Cheyenne leader known for his fierce pride and a temper that could spark a war. If this was his son, Amos was not just helping a kid, he was holding a match over a powder keg. He rubbed his face, calluses scraping against his stubble, and tried to think. Turning the boy out was not an option. He was too weak, too hurt. But keeping him here, with Black Elk's reputation, could bring 150 warriors to his door. Amos looked at the boy, now slumped against the cot, and cursed himself for being soft. But what else could he do? The boy's breathing slowed, his eyes fluttering shut as exhaustion took over. Amos draped a wool blanket over him, its edges frayed from years of use. He stepped outside to clear his head, the cool air sharp against his skin. The plain stretched out, silent except for the rustle of wind through the grass. He scanned the horizon, half expecting to see riders already coming. Word traveled fast out here. and a missing Cheyenne kid, especially black elks, would not go unnoticed. He leaned against the porch rail, his hands gripping the wood, and tried to shake the feeling that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The sun was sinking now, painting the sky red, and Amos knew quiet like this never lasted long. As the light faded, the boy stirred inside, his small voice calling out in Cheyenne, sharp with urgency. Amos hurried back in, finding the kid sitting up, clutching the blanket, his eyes locked on the window. He pointed outside, repeating a word Amos did not know but felt like a warning. Amos followed his gaze and saw a faint flicker of firelight on the horizon, too close, too deliberate. His heart sank. Smoke signals or a camp, it did not matter. The Cheyenne were moving, and they were not waiting for morning. The boy grabbed Amos's sleeve, his fingers digging in, and pointed to himself. Then the door, his face a mix of fear and resolve. Amos shook his head, knowing hiding the kid would only make things worse. But the boy's insistence made him pause. What did he know that Amos did not? Sure enough, as the sun dipped below the horizon, hooves echoed in the distance. 3 riders approached, their horses kicking up dust that glowed orange in the dying light. Amos recognized them: Sam Cutler, his closest neighbor, a wiry man with a temper; Elias Boone, the local preacher, always nervous; and Roy Tillman, a deputy who never smiled. They looked grim, their faces tight with worry. Sam dismounted first, spitting into the dirt. He said smoke had been rising from the Cheyenne camp all afternoon, a sign they were rallying for something big. Roy, his hand resting on his pistol, asked if Amos had seen a boy, likely Black Elk's son, missing since a hunting trip went wrong. Elias, twisting his hat in his hands, said the Cheyenne thought the kid was dead or taken, and they were ready to burn the valley to find him. Amos admitted the boy was inside, alive but hurt. The air went dead quiet. Sam's face turned red, and he cursed, saying Amos had no idea what kind of trouble he had invited. Roy's eyes narrowed, his voice low. He said Amos had until dawn to get the boy back to the Cheyenne, or a war party would be at his gate. Elias mumbled a prayer, his hands shaking, and said Black Elk did not forgive, especially when it came to his family. They mounted up and rode off, their warnings hanging heavy in the air. Amos stood on the porch, watching their dust trail fade, his mind racing. He had patched up a kid, fed him, kept him alive. How had it come to this? He glanced back at the boy, now standing in the doorway, his small frame trembling but his eyes fierce, like he knew what was coming. Inside, the boy pointed to the window again, his voice low and urgent. Amos caught the word for wolf and pieced together that the kid had been attacked while hunting, probably separated from his group. The boy gestured to his pouch, then to Amos, his hands moving fast, like he was trying to explain something bigger. Amos nodded, not sure what to say. He figured the boy knew his people were coming, and the firelight on the horizon meant they were close. He handed the boy another cup of water, trying to keep him calm, but the kid's eyes kept flicking to the door, like he could hear something Amos could not. The silence outside was too heavy, too wrong, and Amos felt the hairs on his neck stand up. The boy suddenly stood, swaying but stubborn, and pointed to a small bundle in the corner of the room, Amos's old saddlebag, where he kept tools and odds and ends. The kid mimed opening it, his hands shaking with urgency. Amos frowned but grabbed the bag, pulling out a folded piece of hide he did not remember putting there. The boy's eyes lit up, and he snatched it, unfolding it to reveal a crude map scratched into the leather, showing the river and a cluster of hills nearby. He pointed to a spot marked with a wolf's head, then to his wound, his voice rising. Amos realized the kid had been carrying this map, maybe dropped it when he was attacked. It looked like a path to something sacred, something the Cheyenne would kill to protect. Amos's throat went dry. Had he just stumbled into something bigger than a lost kid? Night fell, and the air grew thick with tension. Amos heard it before he saw it, a low rumble, like distant thunder, but it was hooves, dozens of them, shaking the ground. He peered out the window and saw shapes moving in the moonlight, riders forming a half circle around his ranch, their shadows long and sharp. The boy grabbed his arm, shaking his head, pointing to himself and then the door. Amos understood the kid wanted to go out, to show himself before things got worse, but Amos could not shake the feeling that stepping into that circle of warriors might be the end of him. He grabbed his rifle, not to shoot but to feel its weight, something solid in a world spiraling out of control. The boy's eyes widened, and he shook his head harder, pointing to the map again, like it held the key to everything. Before Amos could argue, the boy bolted for the door, slipping outside into the yard. Amos cursed, his boots pounding as he followed. The boy stood in the open, hands raised, his small voice calling out in Cheyenne, clear and steady despite his trembling frame. The riders froze, their horses snorting, their weapons glinting in the moonlight. Amos caught up, standing just behind the boy, his heart hammering so loud he thought they could hear it. The kid shouted again, pointing to his side, then to Amos, his words tumbling out fast. One warrior answered, his voice sharp, and the boy responded, holding up the map, its wolf's head visible even in the dim light. Amos saw the warriors shift, their eyes narrowing, and realized the map was no ordinary thing. It was a secret, and he was holding it. The riders parted, and Black Elk dismounted, his presence like a storm rolling in. He was tall, broad, his face painted with red and black streaks, his eyes locked on his son. The boy ran to him, speaking fast, pointing back at Amos. Black Elk's face stayed hard, unreadable, his hand resting on a knife at his belt. He stepped forward, his voice low and sharp, demanding why Amos had not sent word the moment he found the boy. Amos swallowed, his mouth dry, and said the kid was hurt, too weak to move, and he had done what any decent man would. Black Elk's gaze did not waver. He said the Cheyenne had tracked the boy here, assuming the worst. Some of his men, led by a warrior named Red Hawk, believed Amos had taken him to provoke the tribe, maybe to steal the map and its secrets. As Black Elk spoke, a young warrior broke from the ranks, his horse rearing as he pointed at Amos, his voice loud and accusing. He said the map was sacred, a guide to a hidden spring the Cheyenne guarded with their lives, and Amos had no right to touch it. The boy shook his head, stepping in front of Amos, his small hands holding up the map, showing it was unharmed. He turned to Amos, his eyes fierce, and pressed the map into his hands, a gesture that silenced the warrior. Amos held it, feeling every eye on him, knowing this was no simple act of trust. The boy was putting his life on the line, vouching for a stranger in front of 150 men ready to spill blood. The weight of it nearly buckled Amos's knees. The boy tugged at his father's arm, his voice rising, gesturing to the cot inside and the food Amos had given him. He mimed the wolf attack, then pointed to Amos, his words sharp and urgent. Black Elk listened, his jaw tight, his eyes flicking to the map in Amos's hands. He asked why a white rancher would risk everything for a Cheyenne boy, especially one carrying something so sacred. Amos shrugged, his voice steady despite the sweat on his brow. He said he saw a kid who needed help. Nothing more, nothing less. The boy nodded, touching the stitches on his side, showing his father the wound, now cleaned and closed. Black Elk's hand twitched on his knife, but he stayed silent, his eyes unreadable. Red Hawk, his face a map of scars, stepped forward, his voice cutting like a blade. He accused Amos of plotting to sell the map to settlers, to lead them to the spring and claim it for profit. The warriors murmured, their weapons shifting, and Amos felt the air grow tighter, like a noose. He opened his mouth to deny it, but the boy beat him to it, his voice cracking as he shouted in Cheyenne, stepping between Amos and Red Hawk. He pointed to the hearth inside, where a faded photograph of a woman and a young girl sat on the mantel. Amos's wife and daughter, lost 5 years ago to a fever that swept the valley. The boy's words tumbled out, and Amos caught the meaning. He was telling them Amos knew loss, that his kindness came from a place of pain, not greed. A woman's voice broke the tension, sharp and clear, coming from the back of the riders. An elder, her hair braided with feathers, rode forward, her eyes like flint. She dismounted, her steps slow but sure, and asked the boy if Amos had touched the sacred map or the herbs in his pouch. The boy shook his head, holding up the pouch and the map, then pointed to Amos's hands, still stained with blood from the stitching. The elder walked to Amos, her gaze piercing, and took his hands, turning them over. She traced the calluses, the dirt, the blood, and nodded. Turning to Black Elk, she said the spirits had guided the boy to a man whose hands healed, not stole. Some warriors lowered their bows, but Red Hawk's face stayed hard, his hand gripping his lance. Black Elk's eyes flicked to the photograph, then back to Amos. He asked if it was true, if Amos had acted out of kindness, not greed. Amos nodded, his throat so tight he could barely speak. He said he had lost his family, and he could not let another man lose his son. The boy's words had shifted the air. and Red Hawk's lance dipped, though his eyes still burned. Black Elk said his son's life was worth more than words, and the Cheyenne did not forgive easily. He told Amos to come to their camp, to face the elders and prove his story. Refusal was not an option. Amos nodded, handing the map back to the boy, who clutched it like it was his heart. On the ride to the camp, the boy stayed close, his horse keeping pace with Amos's. The warriors rode in silence, their shadows stretching across the plains. The boy reached over, touching Amos's arm, and pointed to the stars, now bright above them. He said something soft in Cheyenne, his face lit with a small, fierce smile. Amos did not understand the words, but the gesture felt like a promise, like the kid was saying they would get through this together. Amos gripped the reins, his chest tight, and noticed the beaded pouch still in his pocket, where the boy had placed it earlier. He handed it back, and the boy's eyes softened, his fingers brushing Amos's as he took it. The plains felt endless, but for the first time, Amos did not feel alone. At the camp, fires cast flickering light across a circle of elders, their faces lined with years and suspicion. Black Elk spoke first, his voice steady, recounting the boy's story and the map's importance. Red Hawk stood, his scars gleaming in the firelight, and argued that Amos's kindness was a ruse, a way to gain the tribe's trust and betray them later. The boy, barely tall enough to be seen over the flames, stepped forward, his voice clear despite his small frame. He told of the wolf, the pain, and Amos's hands stitching him up, giving him food, asking nothing in return. He said Amos was not like the settlers who shot first or turned away. The elders watched, their eyes moving from the boy to Amos, who stood silent, feeling the weight of their judgment. A sudden gust of wind swept through the camp, scattering sparks and making the fire roar. The elders froze, their eyes on the flames, as if they saw something in the dance of light. The oldest elder, the woman with silver hair, stood and pointed to the sky, where the hawk from earlier circled, its cry sharp and haunting. She said the spirits had spoken, that the boy's survival was a sign. She turned to Amos, her voice like stone, and asked him to return the pouch. Amos pulled it from his pocket, and she opened it, revealing not just herbs but a small stone carved with a wolf's head. The boy gasped, touching it, and the elder said it was a sacred token, meant to mark the tribe's next leader. Amos's breath caught. He had not just saved a boy, he had saved a future the Cheyenne would die to protect. The elder turned to Amos, her eyes searching his face, and asked why he helped a Cheyenne boy when most ranchers would have turned away. Amos said he did not see a Cheyenne boy, just a kid who was hurt, bleeding, alone. He said he would do it again, no matter who it was. The woman studied him, then turned to the others, her voice low as they spoke among themselves. The boy watched, his hands clenched, his eyes darting between Amos and the elders. Finally, the woman stood and said Amos had earned their trust. But trust came with a cost. She handed him a beaded band, its colors vivid in the firelight, and said it marked him as under their protection and their obligation. If any Cheyenne needed aid, Amos was bound to give it. As the council ended, Red Hawk's younger brother, a wiry man named Swift Fox, stepped forward, his eyes bright with something like defiance. He held up a knife, its blade etched with Cheyenne symbols, and said Amos's act was a debt the tribe could not repay with just a band. He offered to stay at Amos's ranch, to work beside him, to show the Cheyenne kept their word. The elders murmured, surprised, but Black Elk nodded, saying it was a fair exchange. Swift Fox knelt, pressing the knife into Amos's hand, its handle warm from his grip. Amos took it, the blade's weight heavy, and felt a bond forming, one that tied him to a people he had never thought to call his own. The boy smiled, his face lit by the fire, and Amos knew this moment would change everything. The boy's mother, a woman with a quiet strength, approached Amos as the council dispersed. She had been silent until now, standing at the edge of the circle, her eyes never leaving her son. She touched the boy's shoulder, then looked at Amos, her voice soft but clear. She said the wolf that attacked her son was no ordinary beast, it was a spirit, testing the boy's heart and the man who saved him. She gave Amos a small amulet, a polished stone wrapped in leather, and said it would keep the spirit's favor. Amos took it, his fingers brushing hers, and saw tears in her eyes, not of sorrow but of gratitude. The boy hugged her, then turned to Amos, his smile wide, and said in halting English, "You are family now." Amos's chest tightened, and he nodded, unable to speak. Amos took the beaded band, slipping it onto his wrist, its weight a reminder of the night's promises. The boy hugged him, whispering thanks in broken English, his voice thick with emotion. Black Elk nodded, his face still stern but his eyes softer, a truce in the gesture. The warriors parted, their horses snorting as they moved aside, letting Amos ride home as dawn broke over the plains. His ranch became a quiet meeting ground, a place where Cheyenne and settlers could talk instead of fight. The boy, whose name Amos learned was Little Crow, visited often, bringing gifts: a carved wooden horse, a woven blanket, a basket of dried berries. Amos kept them on his mantle, next to the photograph of his wife and daughter, their faces faded but never forgotten. One spring, Little Crow arrived with a group of Cheyenne children, their eyes wide as they stepped onto Amos's porch. He showed them the cot where he had slept, the scar on his side now a faint line. The children sat in a circle, their faces rapt, as he told them how Amos had faced a wolf's claws and a tribe's anger to save him. A girl, no older than Little Crow had been, stood and gave Amos a hawk feather, her small hands steady. She said it was for the man who carried the spirit's favor, her voice clear and proud. Amos tucked the feather into his hat, his throat tight, and realized his ranch was no longer just a patch of dirt. It was a story, shared by two peoples, built on one act of courage. Years later, as Amos's hair grayed and his hands grew stiff, Little Crow brought news that shook him. The settlers were pushing for a new treaty, one that would take the Cheyenne's sacred spring. Little Crow, now a young leader, asked Amos to speak for them, to tell the settlers what the spring meant. Amos rode to town, the beaded band still on his wrist, and faced a room of angry ranchers. He told them of the boy, the wolf, the map, and the trust he had earned. His voice shook, not with fear but with conviction, and some men listened, their faces softening. The treaty was delayed, and Little Crow squeezed Amos's shoulder, his eyes shining with gratitude. Amos felt the weight of that moment, knowing he had given the Cheyenne a chance to hold their ground. When Amos turned 60, a harsh winter hit, and sickness swept the valley. Little Crow arrived with a Cheyenne healer, an old man with hands like leather. They brought herbs and worked alongside Amos to tend his sick cattle, saving most of the herd. The healer pointed to Amos's amulet, still worn around his neck, and said it had kept the spirits close. Amos laughed, but the healer's eyes were serious, and Little Crow nodded, saying the spirits had chosen Amos long ago. They stayed through the night, sharing stories by the fire, and Amos felt a warmth he had not known since his family was alive. The ranch, once a lonely place, was now a home for more than just him. Years passed, and Amos grew older, his steps slower, his eyes dimmer. Little Crow became a leader, his voice strong in councils, bridging the gap between Cheyenne and settlers. When Amos died at 68, the Cheyenne came to his funeral, standing shoulder to shoulder with neighbors like Sam and Elias. Little Crow spoke, his voice steady, of a rancher who saw a boy, not an enemy, and how one choice changed a valley. Swift Fox, now gray at the temples, placed the etched knife on Amos's grave, saying it belonged to a man who taught him courage was not in fighting, but in standing still when every instinct screamed to run. The Cheyenne sang a low chant, their voices weaving with the wind, and the settlers joined, their hands clasped, their differences forgotten. At the graveside, a young Cheyenne woman, Little Crow's sister, stepped forward, holding a woven blanket. She draped it over the grave, her hands gentle, and said Amos had given her brother a future, and her people a friend. She looked at the crowd, her eyes fierce, and said his name would live in their songs, a bridge between worlds built on mercy. The valley remembered Amos not as a hero, but as a man who did what was right when it was hard, his life a testament to what one choice could do. The hawk circled above, its cries soft now, and the people stood in silence, their hearts full. If you are watching this on television, take a second to grab your phone and hit follow, like, or share. That one click means a lot, and it helps us keep telling stories that matter.